How do you receive an order to spill blood on the streets of Chicago? William Davern was one of the most trusted men of the North Side Gang, to also the younger brother of Bugs Moran, one of the city's most dangerous gangsters. But what if you're ordered to kill this man, and standing before you is not just a target, but also the trigger that will ignite Chicago's most ruthless revenge war?
My name is Tony Castellano, and on that cold February night in 1926, I was about to carry out the darkest mission of my life. The freezing winds of Chicago were blowing from Lake Michigan toward the city, and I was going to plunge a dagger into the heart of the North Side Gang under Al Capone's orders. That night, sitting in my small apartment on the South Side, I was cleaning a Thompson submachine gun in my hands. The mission Capone had given me was simple, but extremely dangerous. Kill William Davern. This wasn't just any man. This was Bugs Moran's younger brother, and one of the most valuable men in the North Side Gang. When Capone gave me this mission, I still remember how his eyes gleamed through the cigar smoke. "Tony," he had said, in that thick Neapolitan accent, "Moran wants to teach us a lesson. He's trying to stop our liquor shipments, killing our men. Now let's show him how a lesson is taught." At that moment, I understood that this job wasn't just a murder, but also the beginning of a new chapter in Chicago gang wars. William Davern was a 28-year-old tall man with broad shoulders. Although he wasn't as ruthless as his brother Bugs, he played an important role in the North Side Gang's bootlegging operations. Every evening, he would spend time at the Speakeasy bar near Lincoln Park on the North Side. This bar was the unofficial headquarters of Moran's gang and was one of the most dangerous places in Chicago during the Prohibition era. In the early hours of that night, in the harsh cold of winter months, I put on my thick coat and headed toward the North Side. Chicago's streets were covered with snow, and my footsteps echoed on the icy sidewalks. My heart was beating fast because I knew that tonight I wouldn't just kill a man, but I would also ignite Chicago's greatest gang war. When I arrived at that speakeasy bar near Lincoln Park, the fedora-hatted guard at the door looked me over. When I entered, jazz music hit my ears and cigarette smoke made my eyes water. The bar had the typical speakeasy atmosphere of that era: dim lights, hidden corners, and dangerous-looking men at every table. William Davern was sitting at a table in the back corner of the bar, with a glass of whiskey in his hand and two men beside him. While watching Davern, I thought about how innocent he looked. He didn't have the harsh facial features like his brother Bugs. Even when he laughed, he resembled a harmless farmer's son. However, I knew this appearance was deceiving. This man played a critical role in the North Side Gang's bootlegging network and was doing everything he could to stop Capone's plans. Hours passed, and I sat in that dark corner, tracking Davern's movements. He was sipping whiskey, talking in low voices with his men, and occasionally laughing. These ordinary moments would soon be his last moments, and this thought made my stomach turn. But I had to carry out Capone's orders. There was no other choice for surviving on Chicago's South Side. Near midnight, Davern got up and took his coat and hat. The two men beside him also followed. I quietly got up and began to follow them. Outside, Chicago's freezing weather whipped my face. The streets were almost empty, with only distant car sounds and occasionally ringing streetcar bells heard. Davern and his men walked toward a dark street on the edge of Lincoln Park. This street was surrounded by old brick buildings, and the street lamps were very dim. It was a perfect ambush spot. With my heart beating rapidly, I checked the gun under my coat. The cold metal was trembling in my hands. While waiting for that critical moment, I thought about William Davern's family. I imagined what Bugs Moran would feel when he learned of this murder. This wasn't just a gangster killing. This was the loss of a brother. In Chicago's gang world, family bonds were stronger than anything, and I was now about to break those bonds. When Davern and his men reached the middle of the street, I emerged from the shadows, with my gun in my hands and a great weight in my heart. "William Davern," I called out. When he turned, A mixture of surprise and fear appeared on his face. The two men beside him tried to reach for their weapons, but I was faster. The first bullet hit Davern's chest, and he fell onto the snow. His blood mixed with the white snow, creating a red stain. The other two men were also too late. Within a few seconds, 3 bodies lay in that silent street, and I had become the man who started a new chapter in Chicago gang wars. I spent the rest of that night in my apartment on the South Side. My hands were still trembling, and William Davern's last look wouldn't leave my mind. This wasn't just a murder. This was a message sent to Bugs Moran. Capone had shown the North Side gang who he was, and I had become the carrier of this message. Sitting in my apartment, with a whiskey glass in my hands, I was thinking about that night over and over again. The distant motorcar sounds coming from Chicago's streets were echoing in my ears. Every sound seemed like a herald of Moran's gang, coming for revenge. When I looked out the window, I could see the snow-covered sidewalks under the street lamps. That white snow cover was in great contrast to the place where William Davern's blood had flowed. Around 4 in the morning, the phone rang. Capone's voice came from the other end of the line. "Is the job done, Tony?" he asked, with both curiosity and satisfaction in his voice. "Yes, boss," I said. "Davern won't be a problem anymore." I could hear Capone's satisfied laughter. "Bravo, Tony. Now we'll watch what Moran does. This is just the beginning." The next morning, Chicago newspapers carried the murder to their headlines. Northside gang leader's brother killed headlines shook the city. On the front page of the Chicago Tribune newspaper, there was a photograph of William Davern. He appeared as a young, smiling man, not at all like a dangerous gangster. This photograph weighed even heavier on my conscience. Bugs Moran's angry statements appeared in the newspapers. "Those who killed my brother will pay dearly. Al Capone's dirty hands reach everywhere, but this time he went too far. Chicago streets will be washed with his blood." These words made everyone in the city's hair stand on end. Everyone knew that more blood would flow on Chicago streets soon. That afternoon, Capone called me to the Four Deuces bar. This bar on the South Side was his unofficial headquarters. When I entered, thick cigar smoke and Italian opera music filled the air. Capone was sitting at a large table with 4 men behind him. When he saw me, he grinned and signaled for me to sit beside him. "Tony," he said, with a thick cigar in his hand, "you're now an important part of the family. The Davern job was perfect, but now we need to be careful. Moran has gone crazy and is seeking revenge." He spread a Chicago map on the table and pointed to the North Side area with his finger. "These areas are now forbidden territory for us. Moran's men will ambush at every corner." That evening, security measures were increased under Capone's orders. Armed guards were placed in all speakeasy bars on the South Side. I also started carrying weapons constantly. Chicago's streets had turned into a battlefield where 2 enemy armies faced each other. As days passed, Moran's revenge plans began to take shape. The first attack came over the weekend. The North Side gang attacked one of our alcohol shipment trucks on the South Side. 2 of our men died, and thousands of dollars worth of whiskey was stolen. This was the first sign that Moran was taking revenge for his brother. Capone was very angry about this attack. "Moran has declared war on us," he said, pressing his cigar hard onto the table. "Then let's give him war." From that day on, Chicago streets were in constant conflict. Every day there were new murders, new ambushes, and new streets with spilled blood. I was also part of this war, and I could never forget that night when I killed William Davern. In the weeks-long conflicts, dozens of men from both sides died. Chicago police were now helpless. The city's streets were witnessing the most violent gang wars of Prohibition-era America. Every passing day, I felt the responsibility of that trigger night more heavily. William Davern's death had turned Chicago into hell. William Davern's death wasn't just a gangster murder. This was the beginning of one of the most ruthless chapters of Chicago Prohibition-era gang wars. Bugs Moran had sworn to find his brother's killers, and Al Capone was taking this threat seriously. The hatred between the two gangs had now turned into a personal revenge matter. In the months following that murder, things got even worse. Moran was making crazy plans to avenge his brother. One night, he launched an attack on Colosimo's Cafe, known as a favorite restaurant on the south side. In this attack, 3 men from Capone's gang died, and the restaurant was completely destroyed. After this attack, Moran said in his statement to the press, "For every man of mine who dies, 10 of Capone's men will die." This statement literally stirred up Chicago. No one was safe anymore. The borders between the South Side and North Side were like 2 different countries. I was feeling this tension more every day too. When walking on the street, I constantly looked behind me, thinking that Moran's men were waiting for me at every corner. Capone decided to take harsher measures to end this situation. When he called me again, the expression on his face was very serious. "Tony," he said, "we need to stop Moran. This war cannot continue like this. Even Chicago police are pressuring us now." That day, Capone gave me a bigger mission: kill one more of Bugs Moran's closest men. This time the target was someone named Danny Morrison, who was considered Moran's right-hand man. Morrison was William Davern's closest friend, and had become the architect of revenge plans after his death. Killing him could hit Moran very hard, but at the same time, it could end this endless war. During the days, I started following Morrison. It was the last days of Chicago winter. Snow had started to melt, and the streets had become muddy. Morrison spent time every evening at the Green Mill Cocktail Lounge on the North Side. This bar was considered the heart of jazz music, and many famous musicians played here. On that fateful night, I followed Morrison as he left the bar. This time I was more careful, because Moran's gang was also on alert. Morrison was moving with 2 guards, and they were constantly checking the surroundings. After leaving Green Mill, they walked toward the dark street on Lawrence Avenue. Just as I was preparing to attack, something unexpected happened. Morrison suddenly stopped and looked directly at me. "You're Tony Castellano," he said loudly, "the bastard who killed William." At that moment, I realized this was a trap. Morrison had lured me here. 5 armed men emerged from the shadows around me. They were Moran's men, and they all had their guns pointed at me. Morrison approached with a smile. "Bugs Moran sends his regards," he said. "It's time to pay for his brother's account." At that moment, I felt death was so close. While Chicago's cold weather was freezing my face, my heart was beating crazily. The guilt I felt the night I killed William Davern could now be my final moments. But I wasn't someone who would give up easily either.
William Davern's murder triggered one of the most personal and ruthless periods of Chicago gang wars. Bugs Moran losing his brother ignited not just a gang leader's anger, but also an older brother's quest for revenge. This event showed how strong family bonds were in the gang world of Prohibition-era America and how personal revenge could turn into citywide wars. Chicago streets would be filled with countless lives that were the price of this personal enmity.